I worked just shy of 40 years, but my pension still wasn't going to be enough for us. So when he called out of the blue, offering a free pension review, I was all ears. He spoke professionally about investments. He seemed a really decent guy. Just shy of 40 years pension. He took all of it.
Oh, would you look at that? What a bargain. I love shopping online, but you know what I hate? When they add on hidden charges you can't avoid at the checkout, like booking fees and handling charges. It feels like a rip-off. Well, here's my tip-off. If the final price is higher than you expected, think before you pay. Not every site adds on hidden charges, so shop around. For more tips on avoiding sneaky sales tactics, search online Rip-Off Tip-Off. Brought to you by the Competition and Markets Authority.
This is a Global Original Podcast. Bit of a departure on this week's Full Disclosure because I am in the other chair being interviewed by the magnificent Marie Le Conte as opposed to asking the questions myself. The reason for this departure is, I don't know whether you've heard me mention it on the radio show, but I have a book out at the moment, How Not to Be Wrong, The Art of Changing Your Mind. And that is pretty much the focus of this interview. Normal Full Disclosure returns next week with some geezer you've probably never heard of, goes by the name of Piers Morgan.
Hello. Thanks for joining us.
In the flesh. It's a while since we've done much in the
so
flesh.
Exciting. No mask either. I just feel
no
like...
audience, of course, that's but equally, no masks and no screens.
Yeah, exactly. But I actually kind of wanted to start by, I suppose, questioning the premise of the book, I suppose, because, your previous book was How to Be Right. This is How Not to Be Wrong. Sensing a bit of a pattern emerging here.
Yes.
And so where has that obsession come from with being right? So I know you mentioned in this book, actually, that you've done quite a lot of therapy recently. Is this something that's come up as generally on a nearly personal note, I suppose? Why?
I think the reason why I'm interested in people who are wrong is because the weirdest thing about my job is that I speak to so many. And, empathy demands that if people have been persuaded to support positions that are damaging to them. Even today, there'll be people who could end up needing free school meals at some point in the not too distant future, but at the moment, because they're, feasting on a diet of usually bogus right-wing rhetoric, they're convinced that all of these children who need free school meals are undeserving. So how do you end up in that sort of position? And my last book, How to Be Right, which was a tongue-in-cheek title, although a bit like Twitter, it probably needed some sort of sarcasm emoji on the cover to avoid some of if you read it, you knew that it was tongue-in-cheek. If you didn't read it, it must have looked pretty insufferable. But that was about how other people end up being wrong. And I still find that fascinating. And, given that the three big beasts of my personal agenda, Boris Johnson's epic unsuitability for office, Donald Trump's depravity outside the White House, meaning he'll be profoundly dangerous in it, and the utter absurdity of Brexit. It was tempting to write a book called I Told You So, or How to Be Righter, but that really would have been insufferable. So I found myself thinking, how do people end up believing things that are wrong and or damaging? And then I suddenly realised the only way I can really do that is if I'm the case study. So this coincided with me going into therapy 2 years ago, almost to the day. So I don't know what form the book would have taken if that hadn't happened. It would have been a much more light-hearted and I think a much less, I hope, effective or illuminating book. But it's about really digging deep into a succession of things that over the last 15 or 20 years, I have been wrong about. Some of them I'm still wrong about, and I know that I'm wrong, and yet I still can't quite break out of the wrongness. So having written a book mocking slightly, certainly dismantling other people for being wrong, this is a book about me being wrong. I mean, literally about me being wrong.
No, fair enough. And actually, sort of on that note, so one bit of the book that kind of amused me was your bit on tattoos and the fact that, you find tattoos quite distasteful and don't love the idea of, so like teachers, for example, having visible tattoes. So for the record, I have 10 of them. I've hidden all of them tonight.
Not on my account, I hope. Otherwise you didn't finish that chapter. But
I did, but so my point was going to be, and it's obviously, I'm sure you'll agree, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the worst thing in the world. So why not, I suppose, why not stay wrong? Why not just say, as long as you're not actively going to those teachers and saying you shouldn't be employed, why not just think, actually, what? I don't love tattoos, but this is kind of that. Like, why dig in, I suppose?
What I do for a living is you forget when you're in the studio that it is real people with real lives that you are not only talking about, but also talking to. So that example was a magnificent woman who rang me, who was an A&E nurse, a very senior A&E nurse. She'd graduated top in her year, and she had a lot of piercings and a lot of tattoos. And I'm sitting there pompously saying, well, it's all very well having tattoos. There's an age thing going on as well here, Mary, probably. but I wouldn't want my children to be taught. And I realised, which she said, would you want me to hand over to one of my less good colleagues if your children were brought into A&E? And she made me feel like a dick. So immediately I'm thinking, well, that's a bit wrong. And then I parked it. I never thought about it until I'm making the list for this book of things that clearly deserve to be on the list. That's probably the least important example in the great scheme of things. But the process is identical. I do this thing, and again, you have to read it to realise that it works, where I ring my own show. I only do it twice in the book, and I talk to wrong me in the way that presenter me would talk, and we dig in. Why the hell are you scared about tattoos? Why do you even care about somebody else's tattoos? What possible bearing can it have? And we dig into the reasons why, and bullish host me asks the right questions, and tattoo hating silly me remembers something that I hadn't thought about for 40 years, which was not 40 years, probably 35 years, which was when my mum was on the Estee Lauder Council in the department store in Kidderminster where she used to work. There was a local eccentric called Spider-Man who had tattoos of spider webs on his face, clearly not perhaps entirely well, and probably some sort of drug addict, because on this particular day, which I hadn't thought about for 35 years, he's in the perfume counter in Owen and Owen in Kidderminster for people who hail from that town, and he's squirting himself with all the perfumes, and security come over and he kicks off, and I'm just popping in probably to get a quid off mum for a bag of chips from Captain Cod's on Cumberton Hill, and I'm really freaked out because my mum never gets stressed, she never gets discombobulated, she never gets in any way flustered, and my mum was flustered. So somewhere deep inside my mind, tiny little issue, I associated tattoos with my mum being scared, and that's why 30 years later I'm laying down the law to teachers and nurses on national radio. It's disgusting, you should have some respect for yourself and have some respect, and clearly I'm being an arse, but there's a reason. I work it out. Hopefully I won't be an arse anymore.
But I suppose, and I'll come back to that a bit later, but I feel like there's a slight line, isn't there, between having an opinion and I suppose sharing it. So
yes.
What is that desire to not, let's say, remain wrong and say, actually, I know I'm probably wrong about this, and I'm going to keep it to myself, but I didn't share it. So why that impulse, I suppose, to actually say, no, I'm going to teach myself that this is, to try and find out why I think this, and also actively where has that impulse come from?
Great question. I think it's come from the last 5 years of work, and from speaking and hearing. There's an example I mentioned very near the front of the book of a fellow last year who said to me on the phone that I know he's lying. I think he was talking about Trump, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And so I'm fascinated by other people's comfort with being wrong or subscribing to things they know not to be true. And I think because, look, no false modesty, because I've enjoyed a period of fairly big success since the Brexit vote. Everything's kind of gone a bit nuts for me, including a best-selling book. So they come back to you for the second book and they offer you a decent sum of money to write about whatever you want. And I just found myself thinking, is there anything of real use that I could do with this platform? And beating up other people wouldn't be of real use, but perhaps trying to make a key that allows you to unlock some of the prejudices that you have. And looking back particularly, the big part of the book is obviously going back into my childhood and working out why I had these character traits that had led me to be wrong about things, but the traits are what are interesting. And again, in the moment the book began to take shape, the answer to your question, why write it, why care, why not just carry on being wrong, the answer is twofold. Number one, there was something wrong with me, and I wasn't doing what I wanted to do in the context of a crisis that my family was facing. It turned out that this great set of skills I thought I'd had, reaching right up into my mid-40s, I can fight my way out of any problem. I can argue my way. I can, I can not necessarily bully you, but certainly very robustly encourage you to see the world from my point of view. And I thought I was a winner. I thought, this is great. I'm over the line. I've got all the baubles I dreamt of. I've got the job I always wanted. I've got everything's going great guns. And suddenly I'm utterly ill-equipped. My toolbox has nothing in it to help me deal with this enormous family challenge. Illness. Someone I love most in the world, very, very poorly. And I just couldn't, you can't argue someone out of illness. And then, so that's my personal journey. And then, just as the book was confusing and crystallising at the same time, Boris Johnson got coronavirus, and David Cameron came out and said, he'll be absolutely fine. I've seen him play tennis. Yes. And I swear to you, my tummy turned over. I thought, oh my God, that's me. That's me 2 years ago, thinking that I can employ the tactics I use on a tennis court to cope with a family illness. And if Boris Johnson tries to do this, it's going to be really scary. You cannot treat this virus. I just had it. I'd literally just been laid up in bed for a week with my wife leaving chicken broth at the door and me rarely touching it, just kind of seeing out that week. And I knew that public school mindset, I knew that armour that we all put on without realising that it's armour, to get through the brutal nature of these exchanges, hugely privileged, but brutal, especially for smaller boys, that was it. And I suddenly wondered whether the whole of the sort of ruling class actually is so ill-equipped in countries, particularly America and England. The reason why they were coping with coronavirus so appallingly was because they opened their toolboxes and they saw the skills you need to, bullshit your way to winning a referendum, or the skills you need to scaremonger and hate-monger your way into the White House, but the skills you need to lead a population through a global pandemic, right? They just didn't have them. And crucially, neither did they have the ability to say, we're not up to this, we've got it wrong. Rishi Sunak today has gone back on something he did in August. Boris Johnson is incapable of doing that, I think, still. And I think it's because of the kind of upbringing he had and the kind of schooling that he had. And I think, well, I know, it's undoable. You can fix it. You can shrug off what you thought was your skin when you realise it's actually armour you don't need.
Jamie is 35. He's got 2 kids, he's an electrician during the day, five-a-side legend on a Tuesday night. His mates describe him as the calm one, always level-headed and fair. He's also a magistrate. Magistrates are volunteers who hear court cases in their community. You could be one. You don't have to have any qualifications. You'll get all the training you need. Interested? Find out more about becoming a magistrate in London at icanbeamagistrate.co.uk.
Well, actually, so on that note, so obviously the book focuses on a number of instances of, you changing your mind effectively through either calls on your show or, or other kind of ways. But I'm quite curious, did you change your mind on anything while writing the book?
Well, that's a very good question. But because your book's brilliant as well, but when you start being interviewed about it, you can't quite remember what's in it because you filed it to the publisher a few months ago. Can I have a quick look? I can tell you. Let me look
it's going to be that, or is I can ask you a buffer question?
No, don't. Let me just have a quick look through. Marriage. Yeah, I thought when I started writing there's a chapter which cut the tattoos chapter, the slightly more light-hearted issues. Marriage was fascinating. I thought that marriage would be one of the ones, like private education, for example. I kind of know it's unfair, but I also know that I like my father, I'll move heaven and earth to give my children the best education I can possibly access, whether it means moving house or selling a kidney. So I knew I'd get to the end of that examination in a position of cognitive dissonance. On the marriage thing, I thought I would as well. I thought I'll get to the end of it, and I know my friends and family members who aren't married, I know their relationship is worth just as much as mine, but I will still feel at the end of this chapter that it's not really. Good. And then I looked into it and I worked out, again, I can't remember whether this is one of the ones that I do as a phone into my own show, but this absolutely threw me. I remember finishing this. I generally write in bed. I remember finishing this and closing the laptop and lying there in bed and just go, oh my God, that must be it. Because, I got mates who give me a hard time about laying down the law and being a bit pompous on the question of marriage. I sound like Ian Duncan Smith usually when I talk about marriage, and nobody wants to sound like Ian Duncan Smith, whatever they're talking about. So I did this self-examination thing, and I realised that when I was a baby, and I was adopted by my mum and dad, my sister and I were always aware of the fact that we'd been adopted. There was never any big reveal or stigma. And I think the reason why we're both so well adjusted with regard to that particular issue is that mum and dad, partly by accident, partly by design, got it absolutely right. And we always felt completely wanted. And we never felt abandoned by our biological mothers, because mum particularly always portrayed the decision to give us up as a decision based on what would be best for us. And now the reason why my biological mother couldn't give me the life that mum and dad could give me was because she was a teenage single mum in rural Ireland, and she wasn't married. So somewhere inside, for me, being married was the bedrock of the foundation stones of why I ended up with my mum and dad, why I ended up with the best parents I could possibly have dreamed of. And therefore not being married, because that was what was wrong with my biological mother. She wasn't married. That's why she couldn't look after me. That's why she couldn't give me all of the opportunities and all of the love that I'm sure she would have wanted to, but couldn't, and mum and dad could. Marriage, wrongly, it was just obviously the hook I'd hung this on in prehistory. Marriage was the reason why. And that was a real moment where I went, oh my God. And I spoke to my wife about it. I said, do you think that? And I talked her through it like I've just talked you through it. And she went, well, yeah. I mean, I can't think what else it would be.
Sounds about right, yeah.
It does sound about right, because it's a bloody stupid opinion that you've got, especially when it's, our own family that are not married. And I reckon that was it. I reckon it was exactly that. And that was all down to asking myself questions, having a little dialogue with myself on that issue.
Fair enough. And I guess the one slightly quiz show question: what was the hardest thing to change your mind on, and the easiest thing?
The easiest thing, in the sense that it went like that, it just went over, was I used to do, and there's a big chapter about this, and it's quite a disturbing chapter to write, because I really don't like myself when I play back the audio of that. And it's when I used to go in very hard on overweight people, and you'll have names on the tip of your tongue who still do. The idea that you eat less and you exercise more, it's all about self-discipline. I might be a bit overweight myself, but we don't need to be looking after these obesity people, and we don't need sugar taxes. And I used to be vile on this issue, and I thought I was so funny and clever. And I used to have a little nickname for them, and I mention it in the book. A mum rang in and said, oh, it was so funny the other day, James, we were in the supermarket queue, and my 6-year-old pointed at a fat woman and said, look, mummy, it's a fatty, fatty, fat, which was my hilarious catchphrase. And I was really proud and happy. And writing that and looking back over that, I really didn't like me. But that changed not with some big self-examination or with some big sort of Gestalt switch moment or road to Damascus experience. It just someone who'd had a lifetime of weight problems, proper medical weight problems, came into our lives to look after our children, and quickly became a hugely important part of our sort of family setup, and someone that we all love. And the next time I was sitting in the studio getting ready to start giving it large about, why are we paying people to lose weight, I thought of her. And that was it. I never said anything horrible about overweight people again. So it was easy, but not easy in the sense. And the hardest thing in the book that I changed my mind about, probably white privilege, actually. And that, again, is an example that it's quite a brutal example. And it happened this year, when I probably at the beginning of this year would have, it says the conscience of liberal Britain. I wear that badge with pride. But here I was on the radio in probably July, beating someone up for accusing me of not really understanding white privilege. And then I biffed her off the show. Emma, she features heavily in the book, looked at social media and pre-therapy. I'd have loved it. Yeah, look at that. Everybody hates me. It's fantastic. There you go. Feel the clicks. Never mind the quality. Feel the clicks. I read the criticism of me. I thought, bloody hell, you've got me banged to rights. I treated her abominably. So I said to Ava, my producer, can we ring her back? And we never do that. Ring her back, get her back on, and get her to explain to me what I've got wrong. And I took my medicine. So that, in context of process, that was hard. But in the context of admitting I was wrong, it was quite easy.
No, fair enough. And so I guess actually jumping onto that, but so I felt reading the book, I don't know, perhaps as a woman, but the great unspoken thing was kind of the gendered reality of it and the kind of, masculinity argument where, so I think quite a lot of the people you talk about as in, people who are like the way you were. So people like, Boris Johnson, obviously Donald Trump, etc. But even some of the like debates you had. So I think Alistair Campbell is probably one of the most vivid sort of arguments you talk about in the book. So are all men. But then on the other hand, I think all the people, or nearly all the people you talk about who kind of made you a better person and helped you change your mind were women. From your wife who told you to go to therapy, your therapist is a woman, obviously the woman who called in to talk about white privilege, your kid's nanny who was a woman who changed your mind on obesity. So so I think my question is partly, so quite a lot of the problems you talk about in the book, are they, do you think, based on kind of like toxic masculinity, I suppose? And also, where do women kind of fit in that? Because again, they have this nearly like angelic role, I suppose, in the book. But where do we?
I don't know if it's angelic, but it's certainly helpful. There are women who suffer from the same conditions. In fact, you could argue that women, certainly when I was on Fleet Street, the women who, a couple of exceptions, the women who succeeded or the women who rose to positions of prominence had to almost be more toxically masculine than the men were. And there's still a few around who sit on the talk shows or sit on the panel shows and come out with absolutely vile things which are utterly devoid of any semblance of empathy or compassion, because that's who they needed to become to rise up the ladder on Fleet Street. And I'm not suggesting we should all feel sorry for them, but perhaps a little bit of understanding would go a long way. So the traits and the conditionings described are not gender specific, but clearly there's a reason why male leaders have ballsed up coronavirus on a scale that most female leaders haven't. And it's nothing to do with genes or nature, and it's everything to do with how we raise children differently, or we did, certainly when I was younger. And I think that is part of it. I don't think that women are taught routinely to bury their feelings. I don't think you are taught routinely to mask any signs of vulnerability. I don't think you're taught that emotional honesty is weakness. I don't think you're taught that care and nurture are for the birds, whereas most men are in all classes. And I can only write about public school and being beaten at prep school, but I think that men from much less privileged backgrounds than mine have much more obviously traumatic experiences that mark them out for life, whereas women have traumatic experiences. The last book I wrote a lot about having no idea about the notion of, I learned from the Me Too movement, the notion of living in daily fear of sexual violence, and every woman I know was so utterly I mean, it didn't cross their mind that they needed to explain it to it. It was such a part of life. And as a man, I felt like such an idiot. I was like, really? Every day? What?
I filed a report with the British Transport Police about a man who followed me into the tube station this morning.
Well,
so there you go.
So that was, I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
So the trauma,
laugh really, but yeah, there you go.
Well, we've all got our defence mechanisms, Marie. That's one of the points of the book. So it's a specific type of trauma linked to being emotionally conditioned to screw everything down so tightly, and it works. That's the problem. You can end up Prime Minister by adopting this skill set. You can end up hugely successful. You run a FTSE 100 company. There was a woman who'd been married to a very, very successful businessman describing her life with him in the paper the other day, and I just thought, yeah, tick, tick, tick. And so it's not all men are awful, all women are brilliant, but it's this kind of upbringing, this kind of conditioning creates these kinds of problems. And if men or women with these kinds of problems end up in positions of power, we're all screwed. At this point in history, they're all men.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nikki Kanani, GP and Medical Director of Primary Care in England. COVID-19 is still with us, so it's good that 12 to 15-year-olds can now get a second COVID-19 vaccine. Vaccines give your children the best possible protection against the virus and help to keep them in school. Get your 12 to 15-year-old vaccinated 12 weeks after their first dose. Book online or find your nearest walk-in centre at nhs.uk/COVID vaccination.
so to push you on this a bit more, but
Please.
but I think so. Again, is the fact that most of the instances of you changing your mind in the book happened because of women. So
Are you sure?
The only one I can think of. So there is the young black man you spoke to about stop and search.
Ian Wright is one of the main reasons that I wrote about going into therapy.
But it's, I guess my question was going to be: can men learn from other men?
Well, I hope they're going to learn from me on this one. Yeah, do you know what? You're onto something there. What an astonishing scoop. It does appear to be. Well, do you know what? This is my marriage. This is me going to an all-boys school from the age of 7 and having a weird outlook, as a lot of boys that went to all-boys schools did, where almost every woman you ever met you would sort of assess sexually before you would make any inroads intellectually. And I think I was 17 before I could honestly have said that I had a friend who was a girl, as opposed to someone I wanted to get off with or someone I was getting off with. And moving on from that and shedding all of this kind of baggage, I think I probably have spent more of the last 10 years listening to women than I have listening to men. And to be fair, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Fair enough. And I guess on a slightly lighter note as well, so I kind of, like, counterintuitively, I suppose, want to talk as well about kind of the joy of being wrong. So, like, weirdly, reading your book made me think of my personal thing that I'm, proud to be wrong about is that I'm against leisure wear.
Yes,
Even at the height of lockdown, I was still dressing up fully to basically just stay at home. And it's one of those where I know there's basically, on one side there's me, probably about a dozen people over the age of 70.
Sure. Then
on the other side, the rest of the world, like literally the rest, all how many billions. So is there anything again? Like, is there anything in the joy occasionally of being wrong on something, on presumably a more trivial matter? I suppose. Is there anything you'll just happily say? Actually, I'm probably wrong about that, but that's kind of where I stand. So you do talk about eating meat despite knowing it's wrong. Like,
yes.
One of those, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to understand things. Actually, that probably should have been my answer to one of your earlier questions about what drives all this. I like understanding things. If I was more technically minded or better with my hands, I'd be the kind of person that takes things apart and tries to put them back together again. But I do it, I think, with ideas and with opinions, and historically with other people's opinions, and now with mine. So yeah, I mean, understanding why I had these weird views about marriage, or understanding why I was utterly stubbornly convinced I was right about tattoos, that's incredibly liberating, actually, because you end up being cruel. I think how much of our profession has commoditised cruelty. Think of a household name journalist writing for a major print newspaper who doesn't routinely attack and abuse people, whether it's thinking up funny nicknames for Cherie Blair, or whether it's writing about people in dinghies in the vilest, trying to cross the channel, writing about them in the vilest of terms. Almost everything in 21st century British media seems to be about simply providing a target, not asking whether the target deserves the disapproval and vileness that's been thrown in their direction. As I mentioned earlier today, it's hungry children, or at least the parents of hungry children. So on Monday, we're supposed to be worried about white working class kids because they're falling behind black working class kids. Big deal, that. Huge problem, huge. Wednesday, white working class kids are going hungry. Oh, screw them. It's their parents' fault. They're all feckless. And those are the disconnects that fascinate me, because I don't think most people would fall for that crap if they were being offered a more nourishing diet. And at risk of sounding pompous, I've been put in a position where I can serve up a more nourishing diet every day, and more people, thankfully, are queuing up at the buffet bar.
Yeah, fair enough. Actually, I mean, this genuinely feels like, I've kind of shared my questions with you, but the next one was actually going to be, it's great, it's very neat. But was going to be, so I think obviously the book is very sort of like, about self-introspection, how people can change, but you do identify some systemic issues as well, especially with the media.
Yes.
And kind of in coverage of politics, coverage of current affairs. So how do we create, it's not presumably enough for people to be able to feel comfortable changing their minds. We need to create an environment as well in which it is possible for especially quite prominent people to change their minds. How do we start doing that?
I don't. This is baby steps. This is just me saying I can do it. And look, particularly if you're on the right, or maybe I don't think I can reach the far right yet, but if you're just a normal right-wing person, then I become something of a bête noire post-Brexit for people like that. And if I can go, well, I'm supposed to be this big, stubborn bully. Look, here's me really laying it out. here's why I'm wrong, here's what I'm wrong about, if I can do it. Because a lot of people in this country are going to have to, over the next few years, admit to themselves that they were sold an astonishing con by the Brexit movement. I mean, no one can pretend now that they're going to get what they actually were told they were going to get in 2016. And I don't see how the country can heal. I mean, one way of healing it would have perhaps to call it off, but actually the only real way you can heal is to press on with it, but suck up the pain. But you can't suck up the pain unless you admit the pain. And the challenge for my camp is remembering not to be cross with the people who were conned and remaining cross with the people who conned them. So I'm trying to create roots down from mountains. The mountains I worry most about are not my mountains, but I've written about my mountains and I've written about my roots down from them, and hopefully other people perhaps might be able to take from that an invitation to look for their own roots down for the mountains they found themselves stuck at the top of.
Oh, fair enough, but actually, so weirdly, going back to the first question, I suppose, but so actually, yeah, like talking about Brexit,
which is not it's barely in the book, I should stress. I don't want anyone to think it's another.
I think, at most a page, I think, really. It's very light on Brexit, but you've brought it up, so. How about, because we're talking about, being right and being wrong, like how about the people who knew they were going to get poorer from...
They didn't.
No, but there are, if you look at, focus groups and actually like some polling, it's not...
After the vote.
So before and after, and I do think that, and again, it's a minority, just to be clear, it's a minority of Leave voters who did clearly know, they were, either going to be poorer or the same, but it was not going to lead to kind of, sunlit uplands.
Right.
Would you tell them they're wrong as well?
Well, they'd have to tell me what they did vote for first. And then I could examine whether it was true or not. But that was the last book.
Fair enough. And actually, so coming back really to Katie Hopkins and other people like her, so obviously you put a lot of value in debate, but at the same time there's also a bit in the book where you do say that there's, you can't really change someone's mind. You can put them in a frame of mind where they themselves kind of end up kind of, thinking to themselves and actually maybe changing their mind themselves.
Yes.
So what... Again, do you think, and that's maybe my personal view, but is there maybe an over-fetishization of debate in the art of debate? When we say, again, people like Katie Hopkins and Milo Yiannopoulos, etc., who have very, very harmful views, have largely disappeared, not because people debated them into oblivion, but because they were deplatformed, and people just refused to have them on their shows, on their TV programmes, and their columns, etc. They just disappeared, and their ideas are no longer in the mainstream, at least in the forms they were in. So why, I don't know, make the case for debate, I suppose.
Well, no, I don't. I never did want to debate people like that. I still don't. I think you validate them. I mean, I don't think Farage...
So where do you draw the line, then?
Well, but the views that are not intellectually justifiable, or the views that are simple hate-mongering. So they weren't... Because also, the people you mentioned... there'd be plenty of people now claiming they'd been cancelled, wouldn't there? I don't think the problem's gone away. I think in some ways it's got worse. The idea that they were no platformed, I would say more that they were given so much rope that eventually they hanged themselves. But I don't see the point in putting... So, listen, here's an example. And I think you'll probably recognise it. And it popped up the other day, but I'm not going to embarrass anybody by mentioning any names. You've got a position where, for example, Winston Churchill's statue... They want to do a debate on a TV show, and they can't find anybody who's going to say that Winston Churchill's statue should be taken down. And there's maybe one slightly out there academic who is prepared to come on and say almost anything because he or she loves being on the telly so much. And so that's your liberal woke equivalent. But why, if that person represents 0.01% of the population, why are they sitting in a television studio being treated like 50% of the population? Flip that on its head and talk about climate change, or talk about vaccines, or talk about economists' view of Brexit. Why are we constantly putting 50-50 scenarios on when reality isn't 50-50 at all? And the really nasty stuff, weirdly, they become the same. So you couldn't find anybody really to argue that we shouldn't be singing Land of Hope and Glory at the proms. You had the person in charge of the proms who I presume thought, well, we haven't got an audience this year, so we probably won't bother with the audience sing-along. That seems to me to be a perfectly logical position. We're not going to have an audience sing-along at an event with no audience. By the time it's been put through the filter of, I think, one of Murdoch's papers in this case, it's presented as an affront to our patriotism, or an affront to our values or our traditions. And the kind of people who talk about cancel culture Twitter get incredibly upset about it. No one's going to book you to go on a programme like that and point out what I've just pointed out. No one's going to book you to come on when they've just started a fire, to come on with a big bucket of water. At least I don't imagine they are. I mean, and then just chuck the bucket of water on the thing. But they're exactly the same, except the people chucking the bucket of water are just as unwelcome, often in debates about immigration and debates about racial matters, because what they want is the person who, look, are we trending on Twitter yet? Is one of our contributors or presenters every day now on Twitter? It's a journalist trending for something they've said on Channel 5 or something they've said on Piers and Susanna's show or something. And they need that. That's the oxygen or the fuel now that drives the media. Argument, fury, all heat, no light. And possibly to my professional detriment, we're increasingly trying to drive on light, not heat, and trying to do illumination and elucidation rather than just stoking these boring old fires. Rice packaging. Did you see that story?
I did not.
People got their knickers in a twist a month ago because Uncle Ben's Rice has changed its packaging. I don't know how. Don't ask me to give you. But apparently this was yet another assault upon our values. And of course, again, what described these? This is what the old book was about. I'd ask, tell me what these values are. Tell me what political correctness means. In this context, tell me what woke means, or tell me what who's actually been cancelled. I asked a very prominent proponent of cancel culture the other day for his top examples of what has been cancelled lately, and he explained to me that some vegans campaigned to get the egg removed from the salad emoji on Google, and this was his best example in a live interview.
Where he draws the line.
No, and he got really upset, and he said to me, "What about my rights as someone who likes eggs, James?" And that's coming up in the next episode of Full Disclosure.
Huh. Neat.
Thank you. I've done this before.
Well, yeah.
You, waiting to get your first home. It's long. But with a Barclays Family Springboard mortgage and some help from the family, you can make your moneyverse work for you. That dream home. It's yours. Hosting your nearest and dearest. Tick. Their deposit returned with interest. Double tick. Unlock your dream home with the Barclays Family Springboard mortgage. Make money work for you. Barclays. Home may be repossessed if payments missed. Deposit returned with interest after 5 years if no repayments missed. Subject to application, financial circumstances and borrowing history. T's and C's apply.
You have had, and it's probably more so in the last book than this one. This one to an extent, you do have people with quite extreme views. I think who will come onto the show, and you talk to them. So because again, you're not getting the kind of figureheads of movements. Like these are, as I think you talk about quite often in the book and in general. Like these are just normal people who call in.
Yes, I'm much more interested in talking to them because they're not getting paid to be vile.
But where do you draw the line? Who's unsalvageable? Who's?
I don't know that anyone's unsalvageable, but that doesn't mean I want to talk to all of them. I don't genuinely believe, particularly discovering that, being battered as a 10-year-old by my headmaster on a regular basis had such a profound and lasting effect on me when I'd spent 30 or 40 years denying that it had done me any harm at all. I saw a father and son on the tube on the way here just now. And the lad looked like one of my godsons, so it just kind of noticed in a way that I wouldn't ordinarily. I thought he looks just like mine. And Dad was a bit of a thug, he was on the phone and he was swearing a lot, and the little boy started wandering around and he puts the phone down and he says, "Stop effing messing around now," on a on a socially distanced tube train in front of quite a lot of other people. And I just sort of, out the corner of my eye, I was watching the boy, and he was frightened and straight back in the chair, and the dad started shouting down the phone again about some job that he felt he hadn't been paid enough money for. And then the phone call ended, and he got up, and they moved towards the door, and he said, get your bag, you look, and they get to the door, and I'm thinking, oh, you're that's a shame, you're not being very nice to your son. And then you think, well, hang on, what will the son be like in 30 years' time? Is the son going to be like that to his son? And if he is, and you see it, if you had this little film playing in the back of your head about what you've just seen when he was 6, if he's doing that himself when he's 36, you're going to feel a lot warmer towards him, or a lot less judgmental, and a lot less, you're going to consider him a lot less irredeemable than you do when you don't know about what's gone on. So on a much lighter, much more less profound example, you get caught up in road rage. The bloke who's just jumped out of his car and started screaming at you might do it every day, all right? Or his wife might have left him that morning. You just don't know. So I think I cling to the fundamental decency of humans, despite all the recent evidence to the contrary, by by thinking about the mysteries of why I did things that I did, and it makes it much easier for me to perhaps not forgive or excuse, but at least begin to understand why other people do things that I find horrible. And it doesn't mean that they are horrible people, ever.
I think that should be a very good conclusion before we move on to questions from the audience. However, I do want to ask you something.
Of course.
You mentioned in passing, puzzlingly, in the book that you once sold a white suit to John Major, and I would quite like to hear that anecdote. And I'm
this
sure
is because you also cut your teeth on the diaries or the gossip columns. What you've done, Marie, you've done two things there. Is you've highlighted our shared past as gossip columnists. You've also highlighted the fact that you clearly very, very rarely, if ever, listen to my radio programme, because I must have told this story more than almost any other over the years. But that's fine, because we're constantly building new connections and new audiences. So all I ever wanted to do was follow my dad onto Fleet Street. All I ever wanted to be was a newspaper journalist. I'd never even stopped to wonder why, to be honest with you. I just wanted to be my dad, like a lot of boys do. And it didn't happen. And my holiday job when I was at the LSE was working in Aquascutum on Regent Street in the menswear department. And then it became my Saturday job during term times. And then I graduated, and Fleet Street proved inexplicably but quite incredibly immune to my charms, and I couldn't get arrested. I got turned down 2 years running for every traineeship under the sun, and I'm paying my rent because, these were... I had a lot of friends with trust funds and flats in Pimlico and all that malarkey, but if I didn't earn a wage every single week, I'd have to move back to mum and dad's in Kidderminster, where it would be even less likely that I'd be able to get a foot in the door of Fleet Street. A couple of dad's old contacts helped me out with some work experience, but none of it led anywhere, and I am there measuring inside legs every day. And one day all the tailors are all the full-time adult tailors are off sick, and the call comes from Downing Street, because we used to kit out John Major for suits. So my mate goes over to kit him out in Downing Street, and I carry the chalk, and he buys a white suit. And younger viewers may not know that John Major was associated with two things. He was grey. His spitting image puppet was grey, completely grey, and he was supposed to wear his underpants on the outside of his trousers. And so the idea of him buying a Tom Wolfe style, John Travolta style white suit,
I'm picturing the fur coat to go with it, and everything.
Whole shebang. So one of the only examples of chutzpah I've ever displayed in my entire life. I phoned up the Daily Express gossip column, to whom I'd sold a couple of stories, and said, this is a good one, isn't it? And my mate Henry worked there, and looking back, I don't think Henry wanted me to get shifts, because I was quite a good contact for him. He'd rather keep me on a string feeding him stories than actually coming in and getting work. And I said to his boss, instead of paying me for this, can I have 2 shifts? I'll do the shifts for the same fee that you'll give me for the story. It's a decent page lead. I think it might even have got nudged up to a page 3. And that was it. I finally got a foot in the door, thanks to John Major's white suit. And I never left the Daily Express until I left of my own volition.
I love hunting down a good deal online, like trial offers that are 90% off for the first month. I wouldn't say no. But when it ends up with me being trapped in an expensive subscription that's hard to cancel, actually, I would say no. It might be a rip-off. And here's my tip-off. Before you sign up, check the terms of the deal, know what to do to unsubscribe, and set a calendar reminder. For more tips on avoiding sneaky sales tactics, search Online Rip-Off Tip-Off. Brought to you by the Competition and Markets Authority.
I know I'm not the one being interviewed here, but it's quite funny because the reason I think, so my first shift, the standard Londoner's Diary, I got a story about Narendra Modi's made-to-order suit from Savile Row, and that's what kept me on the diary. So I like that suit.
A rich seam of journalistic. Yes, it is. This is it. This is all. Anyone dreaming of being a journalist, go make sure all your contacts are in clothes shops. Get down to Savile Row. I sold an £18,000 Vicuna coat to Ronnie Wood once. Out of, I think that was one of the stories. I was £18,000, and he was such a classy customer as well. So it only came in camel colour, which is, I think, I'd never met a Vicuna, but I think they're that colour. They're that camely brown colour, and he loved it so much. You know how soft cashmere is. Yeah. Vicuna is like cashmere cubed.
Can't say I've ever. I'm sure
nor have I.
Yeah,
That's why they cost £18,000. So he bought one and he tried it on, and he's walking around, and he looked the bomb in it, obviously. 38 short, I think, and then he said, if I bought another one, could you dye it navy blue? And I thought, Jesus, man, it's an £18,000 overcoat, and you're asking, I could stick it in the bath with a bottle of Quink or something like that. And I had to say to him, no, we can't do that, Mr. Wood. I'm very sorry.
Get someone to do it for you. You're on your own.
But I was on commission, and I'll tell you what, the commission on an £18,000 overcoat. Yeah.
That's all right.
Well, there you go. Sliding doors.
That's a very good conclusion,
that flew by,
actually.
didn't it?
Yes, it really did. Thank you. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our booksellers, Waterstones. By the way, your book should be on the way at the moment. If you've booked a ticket for this, then your book is on the way. If you'd like more of this, please visit penguin.co.uk/events to see what Penguin Live have coming up, and also subscribe to James's podcast, Full Disclosure, on whatever you use to get your podcast from. And I think that's it. Have a very good night, and thanks for joining us. And thank you, James.
Thank you. Don't you want to know who's next week's guest is after I did that expert?
Who is next week's guest?
Piers Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
And on that bombshell.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marie.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.